So welcome all, welcome once again to the FHIR basic session about the course. So this course, the thought process about the course is like we wanted to design a course, we wanted to run a curriculum, and this was discussed in our meetups also, the monthly meetups that we have for FHIR India community. Like how do we make sure that there is a structured learning that can be driven by the community, which the community can itself run and benefit from, right? So with that idea, we said like, okay, let's get started. And we will start with the first structured session. So I took the volunteer and I said like, I will do the first course, right? And uh, this will be some kind of a template. And on this, like the experts can come up and we can design courses and we can run the courses uh, for the community by the community. Okay, so that's the thought process. This particular course is all about getting started. The focus is how do we get started with FHIR. If you see, it's not a hands-on session right now. What it means is you're not going to directly jump into Java or jump into .NET code and start doing coding, or you are not going to develop a FHIR server or a FHIR client in the session. What you are going to do is you have to know the basics of FHIR, right? What is FHIR? What's the principle behind it? What are the key terminologies of FHIR? Why they are used? All those things, right? Slowly, in the course of the sessions, right? We will definitely cover a lot of ground in terms of implementation also, right? But the focus, right, for this particular session is to understand the concepts of FHIR, right? Because once your concepts and the fundamentals are clear, uh, the learning becomes faster and your application becomes faster, right? So that's the thought process with which the course was conceptualized, right? Uh, and it's again a participatory kind of a course, which means that it's not only about the sessions. So we will continue the learning on the discussion forums, right? So after the session and before the next session, we can still continue our discussions, continue Q&A. And it's not just me, the experts from the community can actually engage and provide answers, provide resources, help out. So that's the mode we are looking at, okay? Important thing to note, as it is a community initiative, this training does not substitute any official training provided by HL7. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so course layout. There are 5 sessions that are planned as of now, and we will see if there are more sessions required. Okay, and the sessions are like this. The first session is today, what is happening, and it will cover about what is interoperability, what are the principles of FHIR, what are HL7, other HL7 standards and all. Then the next session will be about FHIR RESTful APIs, where we'll talk about what are the fast FHIR RESTful specification and how they are implemented, and everything about it. Similarly, the third session will be detail about FHIR resources. So though we will touch about FHIR resources today, we will get into depth of FHIR resources on third session. The fourth session is about conformance and terminology. And the fifth session would be about when you are implementing, what all things you should consider, right? The sessions are planned, thought through for like around 60 to 90 minutes session for online like this, and the remaining things happen on the discussion forums. Online virtual, okay? And then, so apart from that, so before we get started, I just wanted to reiterate for the people who are new to the FHIR India community, what is it, right? So FHIR India community is an open community. Though the name is FHIR India community, it is for all interoperability enthusiasts in the country, focused on HL7 or other standards. The baseline is if you're interested in interoperability, if you're interested in healthcare, you can join this community. We have a social media tag, FHIR India hashtag. So you can, if you're posting something and you want to get it noticed by the FHIR India community, use this hashtag. It's prevalent in Twitter and also in LinkedIn. I would recommend everyone to join FHIR India Zulip chat, the discussion forum, okay, because that's where we want to move our discussions to, so that the discussions are continual. And the Zulip chat is also the technology or the platform of choice that even the wider global forum uses, that is the chat.fhir.org. So once you're comfortable, once we have a community here, you can seamlessly transition to the chat.fhir.org. Okay. There is also a LinkedIn group. So this LinkedIn group is for information sharing, for making some event and other things, right? So just a social media presence on LinkedIn, right? So that's about the FHIR India community. Our goal, and this is the target that we have, and that is to actually grow the community to around 10,000 members by December of 2021. And for this, every one of us needs to actually connect and actually grow the community. So how do we measure whether we have grown by 10K or not? It will be by the numbers we get on the discussion forum and the LinkedIn group. So please, please, please do join the LinkedIn group and do join the discussion forum, right? So let's make sure that we grow to this number, because once we have a sizable number, we can influence a lot. We can make a lot of things simpler, right? Our voices will be heard, right? And that will become the biggest FHIR interoperability community in the world. So that's our target. So before we start, some housekeeping. Please be on mute while the session is in progress. You can do the chat, you can type on the chat, and Soumya is monitoring the chat, and if there will be something important, he will flag it off. Please use your full name in the Zoom participants profile, so that when you're asking question or when you're interacting, we know whom we are interacting with. And the last, make sure again that you are on the Zulip, right? So that's all. And this is the link for the Zulip chat channel, and it's there in the form also. Right? So when you have filled up the form, I think you have seen the discussion forum link. Okay. So a brief about myself, and my name is Kumar Satyam. I head the technical committee for HL7 India. I am also a member of the Education Advisory Committee at HL7 International. I am a member of HIMSS India Interoperability Committee, and my day job is with Philips, where I'm a senior architect interoperability. Okay. I volunteer with the intent of trying to make a difference to the healthcare delivery system in India through use of technology and standards. And that's one of the reasons why I volunteer for some such of these initiatives. And request will be like all of you to spare some time and volunteer for improving the healthcare delivery. I can be reached at the email, the LinkedIn and Twitter, quite active in all the three. So feel free to reach out to me for anything needed. So with that,
sorry to interrupt, Satyam. There's a couple of questions. So people are asking, is this slides will be shared, or this details of this Zulip and LinkedIn group will be shared in the chat session?
Good question. It will be shared. The presentation will be shared. The Zulip thing is already there in the form, so you can take that. And the LinkedIn, that's a good thing. Let me ping it right away. Oh, I can't ping it. Soumya, can you note down this number? Or you just go to the LinkedIn and just search for FHIR India community.
Okay. Yeah, I'll so only this links, right? Yeah.
No, only the links.
Okay, I'll share it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, somebody did that already. Thanks, Ashok.
Thank you. Any other questions on that before we proceed?
They're asking the slides will be shared or not?
Yes, slides will be shared. Yeah, it will be put on the Zulip channel, and you can take it from there.
Thanks.
Okay. So we'll not be mailing you the slides. It will be all on a central repository that's on the Zulip.
Even the recordings as well will be in the Zulip?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So shall we start? Okay. So introducing HL7 FHIR. So first we start with some fire-related news that we are hearing. And one of the recent reports that came out, it says like FHIR APIs will become very widespread by 2024. Right now, the adoption is slow, but it is going to pick up quite a bit of pace in a couple of years' time from now. US information blocking regulation. So anyone who is working on the US healthcare domain knows that there are ONC 21st Century Cures Act has come, and it is actually talking about HL7 FHIR APIs for lot many purposes. This is one news that I got from HL7's website, that Ministry of Health of New Zealand opens up national health data with FHIR. Our own National Digital Health Blueprint prescribes use of FHIR resources, and National Digital Health Mission actually uses HL7 FHIR documents. So there is good news all around, and I have not listed. There are a lot many countries doing stuff on FHIR. We also know that most of the cloud vendors have already started supporting HL7 FHIR. Major EHR vendors also have started or have FHIR API supports, and you have their developer portals also. Apple has its Health Kit and Care Kit already FHIR compliant. So this is the news. Like, so FHIR is slowly spreading its wings, and it's actually seeing a lot of traction to even at the present day. And the forecast is in a few years from now, it will be widespread. So this is a FHIR adoption trend that I got from, and the credit is InterSystems. And this is showing like where the different HL7 standards are and where they have the mind share, right? So if you see, the mind share of V2, HL7 V2 is going down. CDA is also like tapering somehow. D3 is already on the way down. But if you see FHIR is still on the upward trajectory. So what
Yes,
means
sir.
that and the adoption of FHIR is increasing every day.
Yeah, sir. Yeah, Sagar.
Please be on mute.
Okay, one sec.
Satyam, from your side, you can mute it.
Okay, I have unmuted everyone. Just give me a minute.
Satyam, there's a question also in the chat.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Satyam.
Okay, so we move next. There is a question somewhere.
Yes. So
What's the
some
question?
Silas is asking, is HL7 is different from EDI?
HL7 is different from EDI. HL7 as an organization is a different organization. I can answer that in detail, Shailesh. Okay, I'll put a comment in the Zulip on that. Okay, so moving on. So this is the trend, this is the news. So what is FHIR, right? So the first question comes is, what is FHIR? And most of us have heard and worked on FHIR, right? So let's try to understand FHIR, and let's try to define FHIR and see if we understand FHIR, right? So FHIR is an acronym. So FHIR stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. So that's the full form of the FHIR acronym. Okay. So again, fast is relative. So compared to previously, adoption of FHIR will help interoperability faster. That's the subjective assumption there. Okay, healthcare we understand, interoperability we understand, resources we understand, right? So FHIR is a new standard from HL7. The latest released version of FHIR is called R4. FHIR has the basic building blocks as resources. Okay, and we will get into details of all the things in the coming slides and in the coming sessions. But if something flags out or if something stands out, please put in the comments. Okay, so resources are the basic building blocks of FHIR, and FHIR supports 4 interoperability paradigms. So what it means is like while we talk about RESTful APIs mostly when we talk about FHIR, but FHIR actually does support messaging, documents, and SOA-based services as well, right? So there are more. So 4 paradigms are supported by FHIR. RESTful API happens to be the most commonly used one. Okay, the specification, the link for the specification is given on the slide. It's hl7.org/FHIR. Okay. So we talked about resources. So what are resources? So resources are, you can think of resources as the smallest discrete unit of exchange. So resources are the fundamental blocks of exchange in FHIR, right? So for example, you say patient. So patient is a resource. You see observation. So this is a resource, right? So these are the resources are the unit of exchange. You can understand that way. Resources, what I can say is like the resources are like definitions of objects or classes. So for example, patient resource defines what would be there for a patient demographics, right? The resources have their own identity and location. We'll see more details of it when we get into resources. And resources are of interest in healthcare means we talk about resources, we talk about patient, we talk about practitioner, we talk about observation. So these are the things actually are resources in FHIR. Okay, and here is an example. So here is an example of a patient resource. Okay, so this is how a patient resource looks in FHIR, and actually you can go to the URL and see for yourself while we discuss it here, right? So resources have first the resource identity and the metadata. What it means is, what is this resource? What is the unique identifier or identity for that resource, right? And metadata will be when the resource was created, who created, all those things goes into the metadata, right? Then resources also have a human readable part, right? What it means is, though it looks like an XML and JSON structure, there is a text narrative section, if you see here in the orange color, right? Where you can actually, the resources have the description of what is the content in the entire body, right? So what we understand here is that this resource is for patient Henry Levin the 7th. His MRN is 123456. He's a male and his date of birth is 24th September 1932. So this is the detail that is covered in the description, the standard data, the structured data also, right? So that's the main thing that you need to notice in this resources. So the third session is on FHIR resources, and we will dive deeper into each and every important element of resources. Okay. So while you are looking at these resources, just go to FHIR summary.html 217.3, and you can very well see the resource yourself. Okay. So in short, resources are the basic unit of exchange. They are the, you can tell them as they are the units of importance or units of interest in healthcare. So anything that you think, for example, practitioner, patient, observation, these are all resources. Resources have metadata, resources have identity, resources may have human readable text, resources may have structured document, structured content, right? So resources contain metadata, text narrative, and structured data element. Just 1 minute, somebody at the door.
Satyam, can you unmute yourself?
I'm not unmuted. Okay. So I'm saying if you can bear with the barking, we can just go ahead. Okay. So that's the perils of working from home, right? Yeah. So let me know if it's okay to proceed. Okay.
Yes, you can proceed.
All right. Thank you. So let me come here. So 2 people have raised hands. Do we have any specific questions? Okay. So I talked about resources, right? So the basic question is, where are the resources? What are the resources? And how do I use resources? So though I said like we are going to use resources and talk more about resources in the next session, the third session. But here is the resource guide that HL7 standard, the FHIR website publishes, where you can find what are the like. So if you want to do certain kind of operations, certain kind of things you want to do, for example, you want to do lab results, you want to do patient demographics, right? And you want to understand like what resources would be applicable, right? So there is a page on FHIR website. You can go there. It's called resource guide, and you can actually see some of the indicative clinical findings, examples of it, and what resources apply to it, right? So for example, let's take an example, right? So for example, lab results. So lab results, if the concept is clinical findings, and in clinical findings, you're talking about lab results, you should be looking at diagnostic report and observations. Similarly, if you want to look at imaging study findings, maybe diagnostic reports with some observations, right? So you can go and see the details of it, right? So most of these clinical findings are tying to one resource that is called observation. Few of these lab results and imaging, and they have a diagnostic report arranged with them. Similarly, if you have, for example, allergies, and you want to know what resource applies to it, you see here, it's an allergy intolerance resource. Similarly, for clinical diagnosis, if you want to record or you want to understand what is the diagnosis, where to record the diagnosis, the resource would be condition. But bear in mind, this is indicative, right? So this is to make sure that to make the life easier for the implementers, right? So you can use it as your reference to understand like what APIs or what resources apply to uh, what kind of objects, and then read about the resources and see whether they make sense or not, whether they need more explanation, whether you need to add more data to it, or you need to combine with more resources. Those things you can take a look, right? But at basic, you get the mappings here. And this is on the FHIR website itself, resourceguide.html. And there is a comprehensive list, so quite a good number of things are already given. All right. So while we talked about resources, resources are the content. Resources are actually the data, right? Means patient, as we saw the resource about patient, right? Which told about a patient, his name, MRN, and date of birth, right? That's the data. How do we exchange it, right? So we saw FHIR supports 4 paradigms of interoperability or exchange paradigms. One of them is the RESTful, and which is the most commonly used one. So we will talk about it shortly. So, and this is a question, and Soumya, whoever gives the first answer in the chat, just let me know. So if you have worked with FHIR, you would have come across URLs like this, right? So would you tell me what does this particular URL tell you?
Is searching for the patient with the name, test, and birth date given.
Yes. So this URL actually fetches you the patient with name, test, and birth date 1983-0401. Correct? Okay, next. What does this say?
Returns the patient resource with the ID for this ID.
Yes. So we talked about the resource has an identity, right? So we are talking about 1683887 as the identity. So what we are saying is, get me the patient whose resource ID is this, correct? Okay. One more, last. What does this do?
Get all patient data.
Get all patient data. Okay. So I think you guys are expert in FHIR now, right? So because most of you answered it. Okay. So now let me come back to this particular URLs, right? So if you see, and this we will cover in the RESTful API section also. So FHIR supports the RESTful API paradigm, okay? And how is the RESTful URL or the FHIR API URL constructed? The first is base till before patient, this slash, right? If you see, it's the base URL of the server, okay, which is serving the FHIR. Or you can say here till FHIR.org, this is a base. Then this is the FHIR version that they are supporting, okay. The next one, right, is actually the FHIR resources, right? The patient, it can be observation, it can be anything, right? So that's the resource name, right? So base FHIR slash the resource name, and then you have the search parameters, right? So what search parameters you can use are actually defined in the spec, right? So name and birth date are actually defined in the FHIR spec. That when you are working with a patient resource, right, you can use name and birth date as search parameters. So that's already defined in the spec. So similarly, we can define search parameters that our server or our application would support, and that we will see in the implementation when we are doing the implementation or talking about the implementation, right? But essentially, if you see this URL, it's no different than any other URL that you will find in other either the Google or the Facebook or any other URLs you see, right? The kind is simple, similar, right? So any web application you see, it's following the same paradigm. Okay, so this is an exercise, okay, and this is something that you can look at. Since most of you answered it, so here's a question: get all observations for a patient for a given encounter. Okay, you don't have to answer it now. Take it and answer it on Zulip. Okay. So I just want to know what would be the search parameter or what will be the URL, right? By the way, these all URLs work. So these are actually the URLs from the test server. So FHIR actually hosts a lot of reference implementations, right? So we have a lot of reference implementation already hosted, which are called as test servers, where you can actually go ahead and test your knowledge of FHIR, or you can actually test certain assumptions or test certain things, right? So we will be using one of the reference implementation, maybe happyfhir.org, or we will see if we can use something else so that we can experiment with those FHIR servers, okay? So this is an exercise. Get all observations for a patient for a given encounter, okay? And you have to construct a URL and post it in the Zulip. Okay.
Couple of questions also are there.
Yes, go ahead.
I think the first question is from Narayana. He's asking R4 supports JDK8, but latest R5 uses JDK. I mean, it's a higher version of JDK8.
I'm not getting a question.
The question is related to the versioning, where R4, the base R4 where you are referring is running on a JDK8 platform. which the servers which we are using currently for the implementation per se.
Okay.
So, and when you are seeing as the latest implementation in this side, we are having R5, which is coming up, where that is running on JDK 9. So,
Okay.
are you also seeing any R4 getting impacted as a part, just because you are already working on the in Philips on this APIs? I just want to know.
So as FHIR spec, right? FHIR is a specification. It's a standard, right? So we FHIR does not worry about how you implement, what the implementation language you choose, right? Or what platform you choose, right? As long as you are meeting the spec, you're fine, right? So R5, so FHIR spec does not say that you go and use JDK 9 or JDK 10, right? FHIR spec only talks about uh, uh, what would be the resources, for example, what would be the RESTful interactions, what will be the search parameters, how can you construct a query, all those things, the spec, right? So it talks about the functionality, the functional things, right? It does not get into the implementation, right? So FHIR, that's left up to the implementers to choose what they want to implement and how they want to implement. Now, maybe the implementers of Happy or the implementers of other open source software would have chosen a different platform or a different JDK, right? But that should not impact the specification. So a FHIR implemented on JDK 8 versus a FHIR implemented on .NET or JDK 9 should not matter, right? Because it's just an interoperability spec, right? It's a specification. It's separate from the implementation. Hope I answered the question.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So now what we are seeing, and this is a question also to the group, is we have already seen the APIs disrupting different pieces or different industries, right? For example, we see the consumer world, right? Where we see Amazon, Flipkart, and all, right? They are all examples of web apps and healthcare apps. Web apps developed using APIs, right? Similarly, we have Ubers and Olas all working on APIs, right? So now it is the time for healthcare to start adopting APIs, right? So that it opens up the data. It opens up the implementation, right? It opens up the platform, right? So that's where we are seeing the push that more and more healthcare providers, healthcare vendors are moving towards APIs, and looks like APIs will have a future in healthcare, and most of the healthcare apps in future will be using APIs. And APIs can be RESTful, APIs can be messaging, APIs can be anything. But we hope most of these are web-enabled so that it actually is as good or as scalable as other domains. But that's where we are seeing that APIs are making a strong case and strong spread in healthcare. And the use cases are ever increasing, right? So just keep that in mind, that APIs may be the future of healthcare apps. How we develop apps in future will be all API-based integrations. Okay, so we talked about FHIR a lot, and we'll come back to FHIR again. So let's get on to what is interoperability, all right? And why do we care about FHIR? Means FHIR is an API standard, FHIR is all nice things, right? But why do we care about FHIR, right? Or why do we in fact care about any standard, right? So let's talk about that. And then we will come back to FHIR again, right? So far we have understood that FHIR is a buzzing thing. It's a new standard. It supports resources, it supports APIs, and it's having a highest mind share, and it's positioning itself as the web of the healthcare. But why do we care? So why do we care about FHIR? And the answer is in interoperability. And now let's see what is interoperability. Okay, so how do we explain the use case of interoperability? Let's take an example which hits all of us. And what is it? It's the current situation with COVID-19, right? And this situation is something that all of us are facing, right? Most of us, maybe in some states there are no lockdown yet, but most of us in majority of the states are locked in home, right? And for family members, relatives are in different places, right? And I see on a daily basis, right, we are either trying to help a family, a friend, a colleague, or relative to hunt him a bed or a medicine or arrange for vaccination, like all sort of things, right? And that's becoming our daily routine, right? Worry about essential supplies, right? What happens in the lockdown? How will the big basket guy deliver, right? How would the pet supplies come in? And apart from that, the workload has also increased. You see, the work from home is there and work for home is also there, right? So combined, the work has increased a lot, right? So what I'm saying here is, if you see, there is, we are locked in home, we have families in different places, we are all searching for different information, right? From hospital healthcare to essential supplies to all the things, right? And this is a situation that all of us are in there, right? So how can it be better? How can things be better, right? Let's explore that. Okay. So one thing is clear, that if we have access to data, real-time and relevant data, things can be much better, right? For example, as individuals, right, as us, if we know about the latest situation that is happening, right, if we know what to do, where to go in case of emergency, if we know, am I doing fine, what are the things, what are the parameters to note, whom to check with, right? The data that I'm sharing with the agencies, with the labs, with the hospitals, and with the vendors, right? Is it secure? Is my privacy protected, right? So these are the questions that are there in minds of individuals, right? Similarly, government, right? Government has issues with how do they optimize the resources, right? For example, right now they are talking about oxygen shortage, and then remdesivir shortage, bed shortage, all right? Provide accurate information, and that has been a problem point, right? Go to any website, go to any, so there are tons of apps right now providing you COVID information, right? But none of the apps, or I would say 99% of the apps, do not have accurate information or exact information or information to the point, right? So they might be stale information, they might be wrong information. We don't have any way of we don't have any way of knowing that. The only way of knowing that is call up, find out, and yeah, that's it. Manual way, right? Government also needs to predict and prepare for the next. How would the government know what all things it needs to do for wave 3 that is going to come, right? And law and order, you have seen the situation worsening, right? So government needs data for all these things, right? While individuals need data for their well-being and for carrying out their day-to-day activities, government needs data for a wider variety of things. Similarly, health workers need data, right? They need data to provide better care to the patients. They need data for their personal protection. What are their rights? What are the insurances, right? So you saw like frontline health workers have insurance policies, but how do they claim it? What are the rights, right? So what I mean to say is data need is everywhere. Different personas need different type of data, right? And lack of data creates chaos. Lack of data creates inefficiency, and lack of data creates what do you say, a situation like that we have right now with us in our hands, right? But it is not that the data is not available. The data is available. Data is available in pockets. The patients have their data. The government somewhere there is
नमस्ते
data
सर।
about what to do
हम
in
आपको भेज दिए हैं। हाँ, आपके व्हाट्सएप पे हम भेज दिए।
Can you be on mute, please?
हाँ, आराम से हम आपको भेज दिए हैं केवल आपके। हाँ, कल बैठ करके हम लोग शेयर लोकेशन।
Folks, please request, please be on mute when you are taking a phone call or when you are talking. Okay, because the session is getting recorded. Okay, so where I was, that the data is actually needed by different individuals and different set of data is required. And all this data is actually present somewhere in some shape and form. The only thing you need the data, it's not available. It's not available in the shape, in the status that you need, right? That's what the data needs and data status is. Okay. Other folks would be like maybe number of staff availability, equipment availability free and in use, maybe testing centers availability, vaccination slots available, ambulance and transport, essential medical supplies, government bulletin, all these things, right? Data from multiple domains is required to actually provide effective care to the population. Okay, so it's not just one data from one place that is going to help us, right? Earlier we had the thought process that all we need to do is we need to go to a hospital, get treated, right? If you see today, that's not the case. Our health depends on a lot of other factors, right? Data or information from a lot of other various domains, right? And it's not just the hospital and the patient interaction. So this was the case earlier also, but COVID-19 has made it more apparent, more visible. Okay. So this is what the current situation looks like, right? Data collection and sharing at present is like ad hoc, inefficient, manual, and unreliable, right? And we struggle every day with this, right? So what's the solution? Okay, but before we go to the solution, let's have the desired state. And this is the desired state that I just wrote. And this desired state can be, we can have national information grid, things connecting to the nearest grid, real-time data available at any given point in time. Even if you see the telemedicine and telehealth that's happening right now, all right, it's more like a WhatsApp call or somebody calling on a FaceTime or Zoom, right? It's not actually integrated with the patient data, right? So doctor has to open a form and then the video calling application. That's how it is happening right now. It should not be there, right? So everything should be seamlessly merging together, right? When we are talking to a patient, when we are talking or doing certain kind of care or anything, right? For that matter, right? It should be seamless. And the last thing, if you see, the data should be flowing not just from hospitals and healthcare facilities, but from other domains to complete a patient profile. So that's another thing, a myth that has been broken, right? That healthcare data only resides in hospital and healthcare facilities. That's no longer true. Means now more and more patients and people are advised to take home care, right? They are monitoring their vitals at home. They are having Fitbits and they are having a lot of devices, right? They are taking prescriptions. So what I mean to say is healthcare is not only about hospitals and healthcare facilities, but the data is widespread and we need to collect data from all the places to actually get one seamless picture of what the patient's problem is and how to treat it, right? How often do we forget to carry our files to the doctor because we met another doctor 2 years back and we don't have the files now. And this here, the doctor does not have the files. We repeat the test, but still he cannot do the trending, right? So for example, in case of my mother, she had like this problem with the hearing, right? And we had done the test 2 years back, and we did the test again. Now the doctor said like, okay, they're looking like a health data loss or the hearing loss is there, but I don't know the trend. I don't know whether the hearing loss is happening or it's constant or it is improving, right? So healthcare trending is not happening, and for that you need the complete profile of the patient. Okay, so everything connected to everything in a relevant in a semantic interoperable way. So all we need to do is everything that is important should be connected, and everything that needs to provide the information to the doctor to take better decisions should be available to him at that given point in time, right? So one thing to distinguish, dumping all the data is not interoperability. So you connect everything and you just put random data, random everything, all the PDF files, all the XML files, all the JSON files in front of a doctor and say that we are interoperable. We are able to exchange data from every places, and we are seeing here is all the pile of data. That is not interoperability, right? That will actually do data burden, right? And that will not solve any purpose. What we need to do is we need to actually have interoperability which actually solves the problem. Right? So only give relevant information that is required at that point in time to help the doctor make better decisions. So not just dumping all the information. That is not interoperability. Interoperability is actually giving meaningful data. Okay, so I talked about healthcare is not just hospitals and healthcare facilities, but it's actually much beyond it. And this is what we say in Philips. In Philips, this consists of a healthcare continuum. So it starts with healthy living, right? Then prevention. You should be preventing your disease before it occurs. Diagnosis, treatment, home care. And this completes the continuum of care. And everywhere in each stage, data flow is happening. And at each stage, the data from the previous stage or the next stage is important, right? So interoperability actually connects everything. Interoperability actually provides connections, provides meaningful data from different disconnected, disjointed, seemingly irrelevant sections to complete one patient continuum, right? And you can expand it to even for population health. So the solution could be like if we had connected all the hospitals together, all the health information systems together, and also the inventory of oxygen and other things, and even maybe connected the manufacturers together, we could have a dashboard where we could get real-time updates about the medicine, bed availability, and all these things. And that is all possible through standards. So before we go to standards, like what is interoperability in short? So in short, the interoperability is the ability of two or more systems to exchange information and use the information. So not only exchange, but also use the information. That is the important thing about interoperability. So just dumping data is not enough. The data should be meaningful so that the receiving system can actually understand and act on it. Okay. So types of interoperability. So we talked about interoperability. So let's talk about types of interoperability. The first type is technical interoperability. Technical interoperability, we are connecting the systems, right? We have the network connectivity, right? That's kind of the technical interoperability, or we have the data exchange format, right? HL7 V2 message structure, that can be technical interoperability. The second one is the data layer or the data semantic interoperability, where it's about the meaning of the data, right? So when you are sending patients demographics, right, with height and weight recorded in inches and kilograms, the receiving party should understand the height and weight in inches and kilograms. If they interpret the height and weight in some other way, then the entire meaning is lost. So semantic interoperability talks about meaning of the data, right? Then comes the process in the clinical interoperability, which is the doctors and the people who can use the data for their purpose, for their work. That's the clinical or the process interoperability. And the last but not the least is actually the institutional layer or the organizational layer, right? So interoperability requires all these 4 layers to come together to actually function, to actually deliver something, right? So any of the things is broken, you will have not perfect interoperability. So if technology is broken, nothing works, right? But if technology is there and data layer is broken, then you might send the data, but the other party cannot understand it. The process and interoperability layer, clinical layer is, even if the data is there in the meaningful way, but the clinician and the process does not allow you to understand that data, use that data, then the interoperability is of no use, right? And the institutional layer is actually about, is your organization, is the company, is the country, is the government, are the regulations actually helping you with interoperability, right? So there are certain ways, certain mechanisms where these institutions can be hindrance in interoperability, right? So in short, interoperability requires all the 4 layers to work together to provide meaningful value. Okay. So we talked about interoperability. Now we talk about standards because we are going to talk about FHIR. So standards are nothing. Standards are documents which are established by consensus and approved by a recognized body for a particular use case, right? That's a basic definition of standard. Nothing more, nothing less. It's something that has been agreed upon in consensus and approved by a recognized body, right? For a specific use case, right? Now, recognized bodies, examples can be ISO is a recognized body, ANSI is an recognized body. Even HL7 is ANSI recognized, so HL7 is also a recognized body, right? And examples of standards can be DICOM. DICOM is a standard for medical imaging. SNOMED is a standard for clinical terminologies. FHIR, we are talking about, is a data exchange standard. CDA is clinical document architecture standard. And HL7 v2.3 is another standard for actually transporting or exchanging data, right? So this is, so now just to remember one thing, consensus does not mean like everyone agrees, right? So that's not consensus. Consensus means majority agrees, right? So just keep that in mind. Okay. Benefits of standards, right? And this is, we'll see in FHIR as well, right? So first is, it's a multiplier effect. What it means is like multiplier effect is means if more and more people are using standards, you will see the benefits more and more, right? Avoids vendor login. So this is simple, right? So right now the case of USB devices and all, right? So you don't need to worry about what type of data storage and what type of things. As long as it supports USB, you are fine with any device, right, which supports USB for charging, for example, right? So standards avoids vendor login, right? You don't need, if you are following standards, you don't need to depend on a vendor, right? You can choose, you can switch the vendor, but still your things will work because they are supporting a proper standard. Standards over a period of time actually reduce cost. So if you are implementing standard for the first time in one application, maybe you will find that it is costly, but over a period of time, because of its multiplier effect and because of the way access to resources and access to tools and technologies are there, standards actually reduce cost. It minimizes risks and interoperability because minimizes risk because you know something that has been actually agreed upon by many people and it has been approved, so it minimizes the risk, right? The risk comes when you are doing something proprietary because only few people know about it, and as soon as the vendor goes out and the things break, no one knows how to fix it, right? And interoperability, we'll see how standards help in interoperability. So if you see this slide, This is called a combinatorial explosion. So what it says is, when you start, and this is also multiplier effect. When you start and you have to connect two systems, right? You just need to link two systems, right? So you just have to code for their input and output. Suppose you have to link 6 nodes, right? Now you have to make 15 connections, point-to-point connections if you are working on, right? But think of if you have to make connect 100 nodes, and that's quite common in healthcare, right? So you will find around upwards of 50 to 100 systems or equipments in a fairly decent sized hospital, right? So the number of point-to-point connections that you need to maintain is around 4,900. And the formula is given on the right. It's n minus 1 by 2, right? And so what happens if you put standard? So if you put standard, it simplifies the thing. So you put the standard in between, and all you need to do is every system just needs to comply to that standard, right? So adding a new node, new system is just about making sure that you connect that standard, application to the standard node or standard hub, and everything works, right? So that's where you see the real benefit of standards, right? So in a small setting, when you're doing one-to-one, maybe standards you'll not see the value, but as you explode or as you expand, you see the value of standards coming forth. Okay, and that's what I am saying there. Okay, so benefits of interoperability. I'll not delve too much on this because I think we have explained a lot. Like, so benefits of interoperability is to all the stakeholder in the value chain. Okay, and I hope everyone understands what is interoperability now. Maybe if anyone has not understood what is interoperability, please raise your hand once so that I can try to explain it better. So I think most of you have understood. So interoperability is all about the ability of systems to actually exchange data and use data in fulfilling their purpose of use, right? And standards make interoperability possible, right? These are the two things that you keep in mind. Going next. Yeah, go ahead.
Kumar, I just have one doubt. Like, so this works well for in a hospital or network of hospital. They can have a single server, a FHIR server, and all the devices can connect to this one system. But if there are 10 hospital networks, and if they have their own, each one have their own FHIR server, then if there is a communication needs to happen among the hospitals or with the government, government can have one server, and those servers need to be communicated with each other with the standard, right? Just making sure.
Good question. So first of all, so standards are standards, right? So if two systems, whether in a hospital or whether out two different hospitals, they understand FHIR, they understand FHIR, right? So you should be able to connect, right? So get patient here should work both places, right? For example. Now, what happens when you are doing within a hospital? The agreement is within the hospital, right? So everyone understands that this is the FHIR profile that the hospital is using, right? When two hospitals or more than two hospitals are actually getting involved, they need to agree upon the profiles they are supporting. Profile is like, we'll talk about profiles when we're talking about capabilities statements. So profiles are like what they are going to support. So they need to agree on that, right? And FHIR as a standard does not restrict anything, right? So if you are able to talk to a FHIR server in a hospital, you should be able to talk to a FHIR server anywhere else, right? And multiple FHIR servers can also talk to each other. There is no problem with that. Orchestration of how the exchange will happen. For example, you might have a patient named Satyam in one hospital with an ID 123, same patient in another hospital with ID 456, right? And if you are just
Yeah.
saying patient slash 234, right, you might not get the same patient, right? So those are the things that needs to be worked out. But from a standard perspective, things will work. Now, how do we identify? How do we resolve patient identity, patient identifier? How do we identify which URL to call? Those are the functions of implementation, and those are the functions of specific profiles that we will deal with and we'll talk about. Like if there is a community-based information exchange to be set up, right? For example, what are the things that we need to do, right? But FHIR will be FHIR. FHIR is FHIR, or HL7 will be HL7. Other things we need to worry about, like where the data will be stored. How would the other server know where the data is stored, right? Those kind of things we need to work out, right? But other things will work as is.
Okay, it's like if government planning to implement FHIR, then it should give some unique IDs for all the hospitals for each patients, like everyone using other, so that it can be identified uniquely in among hospitals, something like that, right?
Yes. So what happens is in interoperability, we have a concept called what is your reference point, right? So when your reference point is a hospital, right? You need to be unique in that hospital, right? So fine.
Yep.
If a reference point is like say a state, right? Then in that state, your identity should be unique, right? And if you're talking about a country, that within the country, you should have unique identifiers, right? Definitely, Aadhaar can be one. National Digital Health Mission has implemented Health ID, which can be used. We can discuss that on Zulip, and we can discuss that when we are talking about the implementation also, right? But yeah, you're right. Your thought process is right. We need to add different units of reference. We have to think about certain things.
Yeah, I think that gives some better idea. And
yeah, we can continue this discussion on Zulip.
Okay.
Hi, Satyam.
Yeah. Hi.
Could you give some example for the interoperability in the real time?
Interoperability in the real time. Healthcare example or non-healthcare example?
Healthcare example.
Okay. So, for example, you have this lab reports, right? So, for example, there is a workflow that needs to be done where a patient comes in and the patient needs to be registered. And then the patient, after registration, the patient goes to the doctor, right? The doctor needs to see his records. And then he orders an X-ray for the patient, right? The patient actually goes to the X-ray technician, and the X-ray technician actually has all the doctor's order already there, right? And he does the X-ray, and then that X-ray is actually shipped to the reporting station, right? And the reporting station actually does the reporting, and the report is sent back to the doctor, right? So this entire orchestration, right, is actually an example of interoperability, where multiple systems and multiple stakeholders are actually communicating with each other, exchanging relevant information to actually fulfill a use case of patient X-ray scan, for example, right? So this is one example. And there are plenty of examples, right? Cross document exchange, right? If you want to exchange a document or you want to refer a patient to another hospital, right? That referral itself is an example where you can use interoperability, right? So two or more systems, wherever two or more systems are talking to each other, that's a use case for interoperability.
Yeah, thank you, Satyam.
Thank you. Moving next. Okay. So HL7 org and standards. I think everyone knows that HL7 is actually an organization, right? It's a standards development organization, which actually develops lots of standards, right? And its standards are like FHIR is one of the standards for HL7. HL7 version 2.x is another standard. CDA is another standard, and so on and so forth. So there is a distinction between the HL7, the org, and HL7, the standards that it publishes, right? So just I wanted to make sure that that clarity is there, that there is an organization which is in the standards development organizations, okay? And then there are standards published by that that organization. So sometimes what happens is when we talk about HL7, we invariably use HL7 version 2.x. We refer that, right? But what we actually mean is HL7 org, right? So something to keep in mind. HL7 organization is an organization. It's an international standards development organization, which has 31 country affiliates. India is one of the country affiliates, right? And it publishes a lot of standards. The latest standard that it has published is HL7 FHIR. Okay. Now, coming to principles of FHIR. Okay. So first, what are the fundamental principles of FHIR? And how FHIR is actually different and why FHIR is becoming popular? You will come to know all about it, right? So first and foremost, FHIR focuses on implementation. It prioritizes implementers, right? So FHIR specs are geared towards developers, geared towards business analysts, geared towards people who are going to implement the spec. For clinicians, it will be a little bit difficult to understand the FHIR spec because it is actually focused towards the developers and the implementers and the business analysts. So that is one thing that you need to keep that in mind. FHIR believes in open development, right? So most of the things are open source and the tools and technologies are all open source. So even the FHIR tools that are used by the FHIR itself, they are all open source. And FHIR in itself is free to use. And FHIR technologies and dependencies, if you see, it supports multiple paradigms. It supports common web technologies, backward compatible, and the tooling requirements are minimum and mainstream. What it means is it's not going to use something which is very, very out of the very, very niche, right? It tries to stick to something which is very mainstream, so that there is no cost associated, and there is a large talent pool of people who actually understand that particular tooling. So that is one of the biggest advantage of FHIR. The biggest advantage of FHIR is actually that it uses open source technology, it uses standard web technologies, and it uses mainstream technologies, right? So FHIR, if you understand, is composed of resources. It has exchange paradigms, and the biggest thing that the FHIR has is the community. Okay, so FHIR community is the biggest asset that FHIR has. So keep that in mind. And to know more about you can go to the conference page. Okay, so this is the FHIR manifesto, and this is what the FHIR community follows. So first one is focus on implementers, target support for common scenarios, leverage cross-industry web technologies. Human readability is one of the core components, right? So any FHIR resource that you take, you should be able to read it manually by hand. So that is one of the core components on the FHIR spec. Make content freely available, support multiple paradigms. Okay, so we'll take one by one all of these and see what does it mean, right? Focus on implementer, what does it mean? So focus on implementer means is like the FHIR spec is geared towards implementers, because one of the things that the FHIR community or the HL7 community understood was a standard, if it is not implemented, is of no use, right? And if you implement a standard widely, it will improve and it will actually become better, right? So the focus of FHIR is actually on the implementers, right? And that's not just programmers; it's everyone. Like as I said, business analyst, the vendor, the CEO, everyone, right? Who is getting involved in the implementation, right? FHIR emphasizes there should be one reference implementation, right? So it's not just a spec on the spec. It's not just something written. It actually has a running copy. You can find the reference implementation for all the FHIR spec, even for the latest spec, right? There are publicly available test servers where we can test FHIR, and that we talked. There are actually, to make it useful for multiple developers in multiple languages, there are APIs, toolkits which are published in different standards: C#, Java, Pascal, Swift, and many more, right? One thing that is there, connectathons. So you guys would have participated in connectathon last year that happened in India. If not, connectathons are a place where actually the implementers gather together and actually test out their implementation, and they actually flesh out their understandings of the spec. Okay. The second one that is most controversial, and not most controversial, but which is least understood, is support for common scenarios. What it means is FHIR means, or FHIR talks about 80-20 rule. What it says is, in FHIR spec, you will not find everything that you need, right? So what it says is only something which is implemented across 80% of the scenarios, they only form part of the base specification. So if you have a specialized certain thing, right? For example, in US, race, right? Race is something that is used in US predominantly, not in other countries, right? So race as an attribute was left out of the FHIR spec because it did not meet the 80-20 rule, right? Because it was a specific requirement for US, but it was nowhere else used. So it was dropped. So FHIR focuses on common scenarios, right? For everything else, and FHIR also, the HL7 and the FHIR org understands that the base FHIR may not be very useful, right? So it has inbuilt mechanisms to actually help you with adding more attributes through extensions, okay? And you can extend the spec, you can constrain the spec. So those things are actually called as FHIR profiling. We'll see FHIR profiling also in upcoming sessions. And because the focus is on common scenarios and only on the widespread use cases and attributes, the resources are very simple and easy to use and understand to start with, right? Now your question can come, and the question would be, if there are extensions, would it not be like everyone is defining their own attribute and then it becomes a mess, right? So I find that something is not there, I'll just go ahead and add it to the standard, add it to FHIR, right? And everyone starts doing that, right? So then no one will understand anything, right? And that will defeat the purpose of interoperability, because interoperability says that the data that is exchanged is well understood, correct? So for that, the answer is, though there are extensions that are allowed, extensions also are part of the base spec, and they follow a proper governance mechanism, right? How you can define FHIR, right? How you can define extensions, right? That's a proper definition and governance for that. That is the only way you can define extension, right? Valid extensions. And if you follow that, the receiving party can also understand what the meaning and the context of the extension. Okay. So web technologies we talked about. The FHIR resources are typically available to be shared in XML and JSON. You can also find turtle and ND-JSON formats in which FHIR resources can be exchanged. It follows the entire web stack, right? Whatever web stack you see, FHIR follows all. Okay. The thing that we wanted to talk about was the human readability piece, right? So now most of the focus is on machine readability, right? The machines can understand the message, machine can understand the spec, and machine can parse and work, right? But what happens? How do you know whether that resource is right or not? If you got the resource, can you verify it, right? Manually. How do you detect clinical errors, right? How do you detect something wrong, right? So for that, FHIR says that there should be a narrative section, and in the narrative section, there should be data that can be read by everyone. So it should, a human being should be able to read it directly, or it can be rendered for human reading, right? Uh, Freely available. I think there is no question about it. So FHIR standard is freely available. You can just go ahead and download it and start using it. Okay. We talked about FHIR paradigms and architecture. It supports 4. Rest we already talked about. Documents is like if you want to exchange documents, so for example, lab reports or discharge summary or encounter note, right? So these are not resources, because resources, when we see, are small items like observation is a resource, patient is a resource, encounter is a resource, right? But a document will have many things, right? A document will have not only the patient information, it will have who was the author, what was the observation, when was the patient admitted, when was it discharged, right? A lot of things that comes in to form a document. And the document is something that is actually stored, right? And you can use it, right? So FHIR supports that mechanism of creating and exchanging documents natively. It supports messaging like HL7, and it supports SOA-based interfaces also, right? Now, the last thing is the thing that you need to know. So FHIR does not make any assumption about the architectural design of the system. So FHIR is a spec, and as long as you are able to call its API, and as long as you are able to send and receive resources at minimum, you are fine. You are FHIR compliant, right? It does not matter how you achieve that. You can put an interface engine and convert HL7 version 2 message to FHIR, or you can convert a comma separated file to FHIR. That's fine. It doesn't matter. You're FHIR compliant. Or you can have an app and a FHIR server in between. That's FHIR compliant. Or you can do just a direct database pull, and you can expose APIs. That's all fine. Means you can implement FHIR in any possible way that you want to do, right? So FHIR does not prescribe that you just do this way, right? As long as you are complying to the specification, as long as you are following one of the interoperability paradigms, and you are able to exchange resources, you are fine. You are FHIR compliant. Okay. RESTful paradigm I don't want to get into because it's very common. This is the last one that I wanted to touch, and this is an important one, which talks about FHIR maturity model. So maturity model defines, so for example, we are talking about resources, and we are saying that patient is a resource and observation is a resource, or something like that, right? So how do we know that patient, which is a resource, is actually fit for use, right? So that fitness for use comes from actually maturity levels, right? So when a resource or when an artifact is proposed, it is actually in the draft stage, right? Then when it actually goes through the implementation and not implementation, if the build is successful, it says FFM1, FHIR maturity model 1. Then you take that patient, I'm just taking the example of patient resource, and you take that patient and you go around doing multiple implementations, right? And figuring out what is working, what is not working, right? And one by one, you pass different maturity models, right? And only when you have reached the FHIR maturity model 5, which means that there are 5 distinct production implementations in multiple countries, then only that resource is candidate to be said as normative or stable. So you see how the process is, right? So it's not just like today somebody came up with a resource saying that I want to create account resource, for example, and it's gone in production. No, there is a scientific and a very detailed process which goes through actually making sure that all the attributes, all the elements, all the spec parameters are actually testable, are actually implementable, and are actually implemented in production in multiple countries before that particular spec or the artifact becomes normative or stable in FHIR. Okay. And as you see, when you are going to the maturity level, higher maturity levels, what happens is the changes becomes more and more difficult, right? So for example, FHIR maturity model 1, 2, 3 things are actually still in flux and changing rapidly. 4 and 5, the changes are not that frequent, and breaking changes will not be that much, right? So that's how it is. So that's all about maturity model. So what we will do in the next session is we will go into details of a FHIR resource. We'll talk about what is a FHIR resource. We will play with one of the FHIR resources. We'll learn each and every section of that FHIR, means what constitutes a FHIR resource, what and how to read a FHIR resource, right? And how to actually understand a FHIR resource. So that will be our session. I think that is our session 3. Session 2, that is the next session that is coming up, is all about RESTful APIs. We will talk about FHIR APIs. We will talk about what the specification says. How do you, and we will test with a test server some of the FHIR specs, right, or FHIR artifacts. So that we will do in the next session. While we don't wait for the sessions, if you have questions, because this is 1.5 hour session, that is a very short time to actually cover a lot of things in FHIR. But the idea is we get started, right? We get a baseline somewhere. We have a good enough understanding to start, and then we actually start rolling out and start discussing in the community, discussing in the forum, start implementing. And if we face any problems, we are all here to come together and fix it, right? So that's how the model is going to work. So don't think that this 1.5 hour is a lot of information. This is actually, I trimmed and skimmed a lot of information to fit things in 1.5 hours, right? But going forward with our levels of discussions and focused deep dives into different aspects of FHIR, we will cover a lot of ground. So with that, I stop the recording and open for any questions if they are there.